You can also find me on Twitter, although don't expect much from me. I don't tweet very much. But I'm there regardless. I'm Software Gnome on Twitter. And then if any of you guys want to see some of the open source stuff that I've offered the community, you can find a lot of that at the my GitHub account, which is GitHub and then /Travis T. I've got a lot of open source solutions out there, so if you guys have, and most of it's JavaScript, some of it's PHP, but for the most part, I'm a JavaScript developer full time. So yeah, let me talk a little bit about Form.io. So Form.io is a very unique solution that is currently in private beta. We're coming to market with it. We're trying to get a full version released later this summer. And essentially what it is, it provides developers with this very easy drag and drop interface that creates both forms and REST APIs in one simple step. So the idea here is that we are coming to market with a form builder for developers. So in the process of actually dragging and dropping some fields onto a form, you are in essence defining a schema that can be used for the API. And it's a very easy drag and drop interface. You can configure all the fields for validation criteria. There's a lot of fields available, such as online signatures. We do address, which pings Google Maps. All of this stuff is provided for you, and it hooks it up to the backend with an API. So on the left-hand side, you have a form that you created. And on the right-hand side, you essentially have this RESTful API that's exposed to you as well. And all of this is handled in one very easy step when you create a form. A lot of the power from Form.io comes from this very unique element that we're coming to market with using AngularJS. And what it is, it works very similar to an image tag, but instead of embedding an image, you are embedding a form. And not only are you embedding that form, but you're embedding all of the I/O behind it. So it's a very unique solution, and it saves a lot of time for you. So a lot of you are used to working with the form HTML tag. It's very cumbersome. You have to not only create all of the elements within the form tag, but you also have to build the backend to support it because the form, all that data has to go somewhere. So every developer, they're used to writing the form, which is a pain, and then after that, they have to essentially build a backend to help support it. What we are doing is we're taking a form, we're adding I/O to it, and we're basically saying, here's the tag that you can work with, which is this form.io tag, which also includes the source. Another really powerful piece of what we offer is application integration. So if you guys have this, some applications, for example, some mobile apps that you're trying to build, we're using Cordova. We're very friendly with the Cordova languages, like Ionic is a really good one. You can take these forms, and using that form.io tag, it immediately renders those forms into your application so that you can essentially use a form builder and render those forms dynamically in the app, and all the I/O is hooked up for you. So it saves you a tremendous amount of time, and it also caters to this Web 3.0 movement where there's this total separation between the front end and the back end with APIs, because everything is RESTful. We have a slogan that we like to say, which is "You build the app, we handle the form.io." So it's very much a developer tool. One thing I will say is we are currently in private beta. So if you actually tried to sign up for an account, you wouldn't be able to get in. However, we do have private beta access through the form of keys. We have these beta keys. This guy that's in the back of the room, his name is Uriah. He has some pamphlets that essentially tell you about Form.io, and on those is a beta key. So be sure after this is over with to go talk with Uriah, and he will hand you one of those, and you guys can get access and you guys can try it out, because I think you guys will really like it. So that's Form.io. If you'll actually give me just a minute, what I'd like to do is record this so that I can put this on YouTube later. Something that I like to do a lot is once I create these videos, I'll try to get them on YouTube. So if you guys missed anything, or if I go really fast, you can go to my YouTube channel and watch it again if you need to. Just a minute. check. Microphone's working. Mic check. There we go. All right. So with that said, welcome to JavaScript Essentials. So one thing I also like to do is I like to offer the presentation materials so that if you want to walk through this presentation with me, you can walk through it. This is a Reveal.js presentation, so all of this is online. I know this screen is not really easy to read, and some of the code that we're going to be going through is going to be kind of hard to read. So if you guys want to walk through it with me, if you go to that URL, you will actually see this presentation and you can walk through it with me. So before we get started, let's just talk about the who's, the whys, and the whats. Specifically, who is this presentation for? And what I'd like to say is this presentation is for people who are developers, who have experience developing software. We're not going to learn how to write code in this presentation. However, what I'd like to do is focus more on developers who know how to program, but are trying to get into JavaScript. So you may already recognize some patterns from previous languages, and JavaScript just seems like an alien language to you. I know that's a very natural feeling, as the video that we just watched explains. So that's what this is for. This is also for some JavaScript gurus who are looking for a few nuggets. I know myself, like, I really enjoy going to presentations because I'll pick up on some new ways of doing things and some patterns that I have not yet thought of. This presentation is also for you. I think we're going to be covering some JavaScript patterns that even people who have experience with JavaScript are going to appreciate. What will we learn? So we will learn all of the must-know items to be an effective JavaScript developer. I'm not going to get into the guts of how JavaScript works. JavaScript is very deep, and you can get really deep into it and get into some very theoretical things about JavaScript. What I'd like to focus on is what do you need to know to have a full-time job as a JavaScript developer. I'm actually a full-time JavaScript developer now on top of the Bean stack, which is a front-to-back Node.js technology stack. And I'm essentially doing a brain dump of the things that I deal with day in, day out in this presentation. There's also a lot of gotchas with JavaScript that just drives people crazy. And so we're going to go over those gotchas and ways to get around them. We're also going to be talking about development patterns with JavaScript. And with JavaScript, patterns is critical to know what are good patterns and what are bad patterns, because there are both in JavaScript. You can do things the wrong way. And unfortunately, when you go out to a lot of tutorials, sometimes you're taught to do it the wrong way. So we're going to go over what are the accepted development patterns. Why should we learn this? And why are we here? You know, we had a massive amount of registrations. I know we have bad weather outside, so we didn't get the full 100 that signed up for this thing, but we have a really big crowd here because JavaScript, all of you recognize that JavaScript is very important today. And we're learning it because JavaScript is rapidly becoming the ubiquitous language for the web. And I don't think anybody can deny that. It can run on any device. It can run on the browser. It can run on the server. If you learn one language, it should be JavaScript. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a JavaScript developer. I'm saying that because JavaScript is that language that can be ran everywhere. And it's funny because a lot of people are coming out with languages that compile to JavaScript. It's that powerful and that widespread of a language. So that's why we're all here. So let's just talk a little bit about what we're going to be going over. So we're going to be, this is a JavaScript Essentials class, so we're going to be looking at a lot of code, and I'm going to be walking through a lot of examples. This is not just a presentation session. I'm going to be in code, I'm going to be in my IDE showing you how to do stuff, and we're going to learn how to program. So we're going to talk a little bit about syntax. I'm not going to spend much time on that. We're going to go over some JavaScript patterns. We're going to go over JavaScript objects, functions, understanding that this pointer, this is one thing that gets a lot of people, which is, God, that one little pointer just, it seems like it just has a wicked wickedness behind it. It's changes behind what I think it is. It's not. We're going to go over that as well. And then we're going to go into a little bit of object-oriented JavaScript. A lot of people don't realize you can do object-oriented programming in JavaScript. You can. And it's actually fairly elegant, the way that it does it. And then if we have enough time, I'll show you how to do some practical examples of actually taking JavaScript into a real live web scenario, in particular jQuery. I would have done it with Angular, but that's like a session in itself. So jQuery is easy. Everyone knows jQuery, so we'll learn how to do a jQuery plugin. And with that said, I'm actually going to, instead of doing this in the presentation, I'm going to bounce over to my IDE where I'm actually going to show you and be able to write code. For those who are following along with the presentation, you can still kind of follow along with the presentation while I do the coding. But for the most part, this next section is going to be in the IDE. So the first thing we're going to talk about, make sure that, yes, is syntax. JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. So what that means is that everything is declared the same way, and you can intermix types of variables. This kind of throws people who are new to JavaScript for a loop. I have a C++ background, so I'm very familiar with strongly typed languages. I think there's goods, there's bads to strongly typed languages, just like there's good and bad to dynamically typed languages. But we have to learn it. So in JavaScript, every single variable is started off by declaring it with the var keyword. And you can actually, from that var keyword, you can define any variable. So I could say test string to define a string. I could use that same var keyword to define an int. What's even crazy about this is I can assign variables that we declared as a string into an int. So it's interchangeable. We can change things back and forth. Another thing that throws people for a loop, especially with the dynamically typed languages, if we did something like this where 42, we saw a little bit of this in the WAP video, where if you do like a -2 on that, and if I run that, you'll notice that what it's doing is this is actually taking the string, converting it to an integer in runtime, subtracting 2 to give us 40. What do you think would happen if we just add 2? This is one of the things about dynamically typed languages that drives people crazy, because sometimes you don't get the result that you would expect. Whenever you use the plus, JavaScript interprets that as concatenation, and because you're concatenating to a string, it changes the 2 to a string and concatenates it. So that's one of those little really annoying things about JavaScript, but it's something that whenever you're into JavaScript, you have to learn it, because those type of bugs will get you. So a lot of times what I tell people to use and to become comfortable with is the type of. So with type of, the way it works is you can just use type of in front of any variable. And it will tell you the type that it is. Oh, and it's funny, you notice what just happened here? I reassigned it to an int, so now it thinks it's a number. But if I did delete on that and reran it, now it's a string. So type of allows you to know what the type of the variable is in runtime. So if you had some code that was expecting it to be a number, use an if in front of it and say if type of is equal to string, do it this way. And that gotcha won't get you. One thing that kind of messes people up, and it kind of has to do with arrays, is sometimes type of does not also give you what you expect. For example, if I were to do type of array, you would expect that to give you an array, but it actually gives you object. Don't you love JavaScript? So to get around that, there's also another thing that you need to learn, which is whenever you're creating an array, you're actually creating an instance of an array. So what you can actually do is you can do a quick check to say instance of, which is a keyword, and then you can say if that's an instance of array, and that'll say true if it is an instance of an array. So there's 2 keywords that you guys need to know of whenever you're dealing with dynamically typed variables. Obviously the var to define those, but in order to survive, you have to know type of and instance of. Those are keywords that you have to know. Another thing about JavaScript, it is everything is an object in JavaScript, even primitives. And when I say primitives, I'm talking about the numbers, the strings. A number is an object in JavaScript. So I have the ability to do something like this, where I could say Travis and do a period right next to it, like it is an object, and print out the length of a string. You can do stuff like that because JavaScript, everything is an object. I can even do something, even though length won't do anything. I think there's probably like is numeric or something. Excuse me. I don't think that's actually one, but you can actually look online under the Mozilla documentation and find all of these methods that are available for the primitives. The point I'm trying to make is that everything is an object. Even functions, which really throws people for a loop. We're going to talk a little bit about functions in a little bit. Patterns in JavaScript are just as important as syntax. And the reason, and in order to survive in the development world of JavaScript, you have to learn the appropriate patterns. This is where a lot of tutorials will throw you for a loop. Because a lot of tutorials will show you, okay, well, we're going to create an object. So I'm going to say, I'm going to create an object called person. I'm going to do a new object. And I'm going to assign a variable called first name. Assign a couple of properties, and I'm going to do a console log person. This is totally fine. And JavaScript is okay with that. The only problem with this is that this pattern works great for objects, but it doesn't work so well with other types. For example, what if I were to do var ages, and I want that to be a new array? And in the array, I want some ages. So like we'll do, like 21, 22, 21 and 22, and then I'm just going to print out the ages. So with that, you get what you expect. You get an array of 21 and 22. But what happens if I just say, okay, I just want it to be an array with 21 in it? What do you think happens with this? This gives me an array 21 long of empty items in that array. So what's happening here is this pattern of using new object is kind of instilled on you with when people say to use objects that way, but then whenever you try to do it with other objects, it just doesn't work out the way you want. So there are patterns that are important. And the patterns that are very important for objects and arrays are to use what is called JSON JavaScript object notation. The way that works is, a lot of you are familiar with JSON. Have you seen JSON? That is where this comes from. It's JavaScript object notation. So let's create that same person using JavaScript object notation. So you use it using the open squiggly bracket, close squiggly bracket. You guys have to excuse me, I just got off of a cold. And inside of this, you can now define some key value pairs. So I could then say first name, and now I have the ability to create an object using this JSON notation. This is the same thing as using that new object. The only difference is this is the appropriate pattern. And the reason why it's appropriate is because you're not going to run into a gotcha using JSON JavaScript object notation. It also works with arrays. So if I were to do the ages thing again, and I wanted to create an array instead of squiggly brackets is square brackets. So I have two ages here. Run that, you'll see that. Now let me get rid of one. Are there any surprises? No, there's not. So this is where patterns become very important to JavaScript. And whenever you're developing JavaScript, it's really important to know those type of things. There are a ton of patterns, and I'm not covering them all here. I've got 2 links here that I really recommend that you guys go to and read up on. These talk about JavaScript patterns, and it's a very good read, and there's a lot of them. So let's talk a little bit about objects. Excuse me, I'll get a drink of So we got a little bit of a taste of what objects are. But let me go into a little bit more detail on what they really are. So objects are an unordered collection of key value pairs. And to create an object, we just do what we just did. We do the squiggly brackets, open squiggly brackets, close squiggly brackets. Now, let's talk about the keys. The keys have to be strings. The keys are what you use to look up a property on the object. So you could use string like this, and use a colon to denote the difference between a key and a value. That's okay. In fact, that's actually appropriate JSON, and I would actually go as far to say that that's not an anti-pattern. That's a common practice. The only thing is it's a little bit cleaner, in my opinion, whenever you leave out the string, because then it looks more object-like. So in JavaScript, you'll see this a lot. You'll see open squiggly brackets, and then in there you'll see some property with a colon next to it. This is the key to the object. The next thing that follows that is the value. One thing I'll tell you is the value can be anything. It can be it could be a function. So I could say get name, which is the key. The value can be a function. This is appropriate in JavaScript. It can also be another object. So sometimes you might see like address. That's the key. The value can be another object. So this is a very, very common pattern to define objects. And what's really important to remember is that we have keys and we have values, and the values can be anything. It can be callback functions. They can be arrays if you wanted them to be. It can be anything. Moving on. Let's talk about functions. Functions are fun because they will drive you crazy if you're not careful with them. And I think what really throws people for a loop is that in JavaScript, a function is treated like a first-class object. Now I know you're like, what does that even mean? First-class object means that it is treated just like another variable. It is an object, which is weird because, especially if you're coming from something like C++, where those are two completely different things. Functions and variables are just two different things. A function is an object in JavaScript. So I could actually do something. I could declare a function. You know, if they call it, they'll do something. But I could also do something like this. I can actually assign properties to that function. And if I did a console log of what that actually looks like, you'll notice that it's okay with it. Because I'm defining a function, the function's an object, and because it's an object, I can assign properties to it. I know what you're going to ask next. Why would you do that? Why would anybody do that? Well, there's a very good use case on why you would do something like this, and you use it a lot whenever you're doing object-oriented. For example, this could be a class called person, and where you can create instances of that person. First name and last name would be properties on the person, but a lot of times what you'll see are what are called static methods. And these static methods are essentially methods that are assigned to the object of person, and every time that you create a new person, it essentially creates the prototype of the person and leaves out the static methods. That's a very common pattern, especially what you'll find in like MongoDB. You'll see that a lot, and it's a very accepted pattern. So functions are objects. Another thing is that functions can be anonymous. What that means is functions don't even need a name to exist. You see this a lot whenever you see set timeout. So set timeout, what it does is it calls a function after a certain amount of time. So I could say function, after 1 second, I'm going to print out something. So that way, after 1 second, you'll see that it ends up calling. Well, let's actually dissect this a little bit. What I'm actually passing to set timeout is what's called an anonymous function. It doesn't have a name. It's a function that exists, and JavaScript can call it, and it's okay with that. Functions can also be self-executing. And what that means is that you can define a function and execute it immediately. So let me show you the real life example of what that actually means and why it would be used. So let me just refactor this a little bit. And what I'm going to do is actually create this variable called message out here. I'm going to assign that to hello there. And instead, I'm going to pass that into there. Everything still works just fine. I'll go into a scope here in a little bit. But now I've got this message that's defined on the global scope. And I'm going to talk very deep about scopes here in a little bit, so I don't want that word to scare you. All that you need to know is that let's assume that this is inside my own application file called app.js. And then down here I've got this other file that I loaded called vendor.js. And somewhere in there, it's a library this is a library that I have no control over. I'm just including it as a dependency. And let's just say somewhere in that library it has some if statement that says if message is defined, crap the bed. So what would happen there is that your application would stop working because you are defining a variable on what's called the global scope that also applies to any other JavaScript library that you load into it. You don't know how they're going to use this. So the way that you fix this is you create what's called a self-executing function to encapsulate this logic inside of it. So the way that a self-executing function works is you have to start off with parentheses. And you type function, it's an anonymous function at that point. So now we have an anonymous function, which is what we did in the set timeout. And you're going to wrap it with parentheses. You're doing that so that you can call it immediately. So you see this a lot in JavaScript, and I know a lot of people when they see that, they're like, what is that? It just looks like a mess of characters that actually does something. The purpose behind this little chunk of code is so that we could actually copy this, put it inside of there, and now we have a fully contained logic that is executed within its own scope. So now whenever I'm defining messages, I'm not defining it on a global scope, I'm defining it within the scope that's defined by this function, and I'll talk about scopes here in a little bit. So what happens here is we are actually creating a function, we're executing it immediately so that it defines its own scope, and then from there we have essentially a containerized version of what gets executed. So that is where you would use a self-executing anonymous function is what those are called. Functions can also encapsulate and capture scope. So a lot of times you'll see another gotcha. So I'm going to talk about a gotcha that you're going to see a lot. And to do that, I'm going to refactor things a little bit. I'm still going to keep it inside my anonymous function, but instead of just message, I'm going to make this messages. I'm going to make this an array of messages. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate over those array using the for loop. I'm not going to go into for loops. I'm not going to go into if statements. I'm assuming you guys have some programming. And inside that for loop, I'm just going to do a console log, and I'm just going to log the messages at that. So far, so good. This is easy, right? You know what? I probably should get rid of this so it doesn't barf all over me. And whenever I execute that, you'll notice it's totally fine. Hello there. It executed. Everything's fine. What do you think would happen if I did something asynchronously within this for loop, like a set timeout? I love set timeouts because they let you simulate asynchronous behavior. And what I'm going to do is make every 1 second, after 1 second, I want to say hello and then there. Do you guys know what would happen if I did this? Somebody want to take a guess?
We've got a closure.
Okay, I like that you use that word. I've got a closure. Where do you think the closure is?
Okay, so the message is actually, I remember this right.
It's fine. We can talk through this.
The messaging is in the inner function is actually referencing the outer function's message.
Yep. So you think this is good?
I have to run to be sure. It looks good.
Let's run it just to see what happens. There. It's going to be okay.
Okay.
What is happening is, you're right, the message is fine. What's happening is the I variable is changing out of context. So that by the time that set timeout is executed, the I is already the last one. So this gets people all the time, especially whenever you're writing code and you're saying, okay, I've got some asynchronous behavior going on. I depend on a variable that's up here. It's iterating, and then things just don't work.
How can you make it the first one?
Well, I'm about to show you. So let's talk. You're talking about how to fix this?
Can you fix that? The 1,000.
Oh, I'll make it as short as it can get. 1. There. It still doesn't. The reason is it doesn't matter how quick it happens. What happens is set timeout also will kind of throw it. JavaScript's an event loop, and set timeout basically says execute this on the next event loop. So by the time it comes around, it's already gone. It's already at the largest it will be. So let's talk about how to fix this. And actually, how you fix this may kind of blow your minds a little bit, because a lot of people learn that, if you put something in a function, it essentially is the same thing, right? So if I created a function called var say, and I just pass that variable, and all I'm going to do is copy. I'm not changing anything. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put that in there. And so everyone's like, and if you create a function that's the same thing, it's going to do the same thing, right? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all in favor say aye. So what do you guys think is going to happen there? Essentially, technically, and according to code, it's doing the same thing, right? All I did is copied it, put it into a function, and then I called it. Surprisingly, this fixes it. Let's talk about that. How did that fix it? The reason is because of this statement right here. A function captures, actually it defines its scope. So whenever I created a function and I passed I to it, I is now within its own scope, and its scope is defined by that function. So whenever I call say multiple times, I'm passing a variable. That variable is being assigned to that function's scope. And so when I call it again, it's a copy, right? These are separate scopes because it's calling the say function. So this is a big gotcha that gets people. And so we have to understand that functions define scope, and that's how you deal with things like this. So let's do something else here. In fact, I actually don't like the behavior of this. Right? This behavior is I have a function called say, and then it's like a politician. It's very opinionated, right? It's going to automatically delay 100 seconds. How could I rewrite this so that I could put set timeout here? And then I could pass in the delay. Well, that's pretty easy. All I would have to do is get rid of this set timeout and just return that function. Right? So I'm basically doing the same thing, although it's a little bit better. It's constructed better. I'm passing the callback to set timeout. It's going to execute it. If I execute, it's basically going to do the same thing. But there's one big difference here, and the big difference is we've just created what's called a closure. And that is what a closure is. A closure basically says I have this outer function that defines scope. And that scope is used as the way to pass in the scope for that function, and it maintains that scope no matter how it's executed or when it's executed. So that whenever this console log executes, 1 second later, that I variable is still the same as whenever I called it. So this is called a closure, which is a very important concept to JavaScript. And it's used to fix things like that. It also allows us to start to establish what is called the module pattern. So there's a thing here right here is called module pattern, and it's something that's very important, especially when you do professional JavaScript, because when you do professional JavaScript, you're going to start creating a lot of modules that should be reused by other people. And so the way the module pattern works is it actually starts off with this, excuse me, it starts off with this self-executing anonymous function. Let's actually just keep our messages there. We're going to make an alert module that allows us to keep track of alerts. Okay? So in order to do that, we're going to basically say assign the module to whatever this thing returns. Now the problem is this isn't returning anything. This is calling this function, and you notice this function isn't returning anything. So to make a module, we actually return something, and we return the interface. And what's really great about this pattern is we have both a public and private interface to work with now. We have private interface, which is this messages variable. There is no way for whoever does something with this alert, whatever that was, this would not work because I have not exposed messages outside of that enclosed scope. The only thing that would be exposed is whatever I return within the public interface. So I could create a method on this object called addMessage. And all that does, because the public interface has access to the private object, I could say push message. And then I could actually add a log function, which basically does a console log messages. So what's cool about this is I've actually created what's called the module pattern, which means I am now creating a module that I can expose to third-party people. I don't have to worry about exposing globals. No globals are exposed here. Only the interface that I want to be exposed is now exposed. And this is actually a very elegant way to use it. So I could say alert add hello, alert add there, and it's basically it's adding those to the messages. And then if I typed alert log, I only have access. In fact, what I'm going to do right here is do a console log of the alert just to prove that all I have access to are those public interfaces. So you'll notice all I have access to is the add and log, and this actually worked because I am accessing the messages variable from within a public interface. This also works for private methods. So if you wanted to say, all right, I want to have a, let's say instead of an array, I wanted to actually have a print function here. And what I'm going to end up doing is say, I want to return messages join with a space. So this would be a private method. And then all I have to do is do console log print. And now I have the ability to kind of change that public interface. And I'm now using this private method. So this is that module pattern that a lot of you are familiar with. A lot of you are used to consuming modules that behave like this, and this is how you build one. Let me talk about the common JS module pattern, because the common JS module pattern is becoming widespread in use for Node.js modules. It's also very popular for front-end modules as well, like what is it? Require.js, I think, is the common JS module pattern. And the way that a common JS module pattern works is very similar to how this module pattern works. The only difference is you don't execute it immediately. So right now, you see that we're defining this alert and we're executing it immediately. A lot of times what you'll see is we're just going to get rid of the immediate execution portion of it. And then we're going to assign it to something called module exports. And so this would end up being in a module called alert.js. And what module exports does, and so for any of you who are familiar with Node.js, when you define a module, you're essentially defining it this way. you are exporting that interface to the module. So if anybody requires your module, that's the interface they get. A lot of times what you'll see is you'll see people provide options into that. So whenever you do a require, you can pass in options. So for example, if you wanted to pass in the separator, you could say options separator. And what's really cool about this is I'm still maintaining that private and public interface. This still works. Just because I'm not self-executing doesn't mean I don't maintain private and public interfaces. This all would still work, but now if I want to consume it from, let's say, my app.js, I could then say my alert, because I'm essentially configuring the class. I could say require alert, and I could pass it whatever configurations I want. So what's really cool about that is you now give people the ability to configure your module by passing in options. So this is a very good pattern to use whenever you're creating libraries that other people are going to be using. So let's talk about the this pointer. Up until now, we've really been concentrating on functions, scope, modules, but we really haven't dove into object-oriented. In order to really get into object-oriented JavaScript, we have to understand the this pointer. It'll drive you crazy. In order to get started, I need to start off by describing the difference between scope and context. In fact, I have a video on YouTube right now where I got this wrong. I mean, a lot of people get it wrong, but it's extremely important to know what the difference between scope and context is, because they are different things in JavaScript. Scope is what we've just learned. Functions define scope. So every time you call a function, it defines its own scope. That's the reason. That's how we got out of that set timeout issue, is because it's defining its own scope. Context is the this pointer, and they are not the same. And people confuse them to be the same thing, but they're not. The this pointer is assigned to new objects. So here's the rule: new objects create context. That this pointer is the context. Those are going to be used interchangeably. When I say context, I can mean the this pointer. The rule is that the this pointer is assigned to the object instance that invokes a method. Now, a lot of people are like, the this pointer is assigned to whoever owns that function. That's not the case. That'll get you. Let me show you an example of how that'll get you. So let me just show you me creating a person class. Actually, I'll just create to keep it simple, we're not going to use the new. We're just going to use this, which actually, keep in mind, remember what we learned earlier, this is the same thing as saying new object. So we have a this pointer on person. I can use this because this is a new object. So I say first, last, and next thing we're going to do a get name method. And that get name method is just going, or let me just say name, that'll be more interesting. Say name. I'll do what you're not supposed to do, put console logs inside your code. I'm just doing that for demo purposes. So what I'm doing here is I've got this person, I've got a name, and I'm using the this pointer. This points to the object, the new object that instantiates the method. So if I were to say console log person say name, what new object is instantiating the method? Person. Does person have a this pointer? Yes, it does. If you can answer those two questions, then you know that this will execute. It's going to crash. Cannot find a module alert. Oh yeah, that's funny. I forgot to delete my code up here. it's totally fine. In fact, actually, I don't need this console log. The reason why that undefined is there is because this isn't returning anything. So it's fine. The reason why it's fine is because person is a thing. It's a new object. We newed it right here, even though you don't see the new keyword. It is a new object. That means it has a this pointer. And because person instantiated the sayName method, that means that this pointer is pointing to person. This is where a lot of people are saying, oh, it's the this pointer is pointing. It points to the object that owns the method. This is where that'll get you. I'm going to use set timeout again. What will this do?
Only show last.
Let's run it. So you're going to see two things. The first one is going to be the good one. Actually, let me delete this just so that we don't get confused. If I run this, after 1 second, you get undefined, undefined. This is where you throw your computer out the window because you're so frustrated with JavaScript because it's not working the way you want it to work. Who instantiated the sayName method? Or what's the word here I'm looking for? Invoked. I keep saying instantiated. Who invoked the sayName method? Whatever set timeout is, it invoked it. Person didn't invoke it. So what happened here is we are passing a method to set timeout, thinking that this pointer is going to be just hunky-dory whenever that sayName is actually executed. Come to find out, set timeout invoked the method, and that this pointer is completely bogus. This will get you every time, and it'll drive you crazy. So how do you fix that? So you could either A, do this. Here's one way to do it. That's fine, because the person invoked it. This is ugly. I don't particularly like that. So now we're going to learn about some other keywords that you guys are going to like. And I use these all the time. One of them is called bind. So what bind does is it allows you to bind the this pointer to a method so that whenever it's invoked, it doesn't matter who invokes it, that bind will take precedence. And all you have to do is say bind, and then whatever you want the this pointer to be when that method is invoked. I want the this pointer to be person. So now if I execute that, we're happy again. You see this a lot, especially like if you're creating like classes and you have like a person, a person class, and you do a set timeout, so you have like this first. So you'll see this as well, and you'll see like a set timeout or anything else that's asynchronous with a callback function. Callback functions will get you. So anytime you see something that looks like that, that's trouble. And it doesn't have to be set timeout. This can be an HTTP request. This could be anything you pass a callback to. I want you guys to know that this pointer is not what you're going to think it's going to be when it comes back. However, you're in luck because all you have to do to fix it is use the bind keyword and assign the this pointer to that callback function so that whenever it is executed, that this pointer is now set to the real this, and you're okay. That one little word will save the day time and time again. I use it all the time. I use that to keep consistency in my code, especially I write a lot of object-oriented JavaScript, and so I use bind all the time. Excuse me. Another thing that can set the this pointer is two words called call and apply. So just to give you an example, I'll use my person object again. So what I'm going to do is create a class. It's going to take first. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? Yeah, I'll do last. Actually, I'm thinking I should just do a method. Say. just to keep things less, because I don't want to go into actual objects. I'll keep it like this right now. So I'll say first. I'll do middle. Don't steal my identity. Probably should use bogus names, but oh well, this is easier. And then I'm going to have just a function called say name, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just say name 1, name 2, name 3, and just do a call. It'll make sense once I actually use it. So now what I can actually do is I can use the bind keyword. So I could say, do say name, bind, call. And the call, the way it works is you can call, actually we could do this. I know this is confusing right now. It won't be here in a second. So what I'm trying to do is create a function where I could say middle, last, first, and it'll do that in that order. I could say first, middle, last, and it'll do in those order. And I actually pass it like this. I could say, say first, middle, last, right? And what this will do is this will look at the this pointer and pick out that property in console logit. The problem is when I call this function, the this pointer isn't set. So this is where call is used. You use call to define the this pointer whenever that method is executed. So I can say call person, which is the this pointer to use, so that whenever say name is executed, this is now assigned to person, and then these map up to the arguments. So if I did that, hopefully it works. Yeah. So Travis, and I could actually do something like this. And so now the this pointer is established because I'm using the call keyword. That's another thing that'll get you, because especially if you have an object that they're using this pointer a lot, don't be a jerk and call somebody's class and use the call method and reassign the this pointer. Because what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up executing things in an unestablished way from the module. The module expects this to be something, and you actually, in JavaScript, you have the ability to call things with a different this pointer. This also allows you to do something called duck punching, where if you have a module that doesn't behave the way you want it to behave, you can duck punch it into reassigning the this pointer for certain methods, and that method will call your class, which does something different. It works. You can do it that way. So JavaScript allows you to do something like that. The other one that you'll see is something called apply. Apply is very similar to call. The only difference is instead of passing arguments like that, you pass arguments as an array. It does the same thing. The only difference is you're passing an array of arguments with apply. And what it does is it takes that array and it translates them to those to the actual arguments of the function. You see this a lot in object-oriented whenever people are saying use the arguments keyword, so that if you wanted to apply this to and extrapolate the arguments of the function to whatever it is you're calling, you see that a lot. You don't see it that much though. But it's important because that sets the this pointer. So just keep in mind, we want to review the this pointer. This is assigned to the object instance that invokes a method. That's one thing. That's pretty easy. You can figure out what the this pointer is going to be that way. And then you can bind. You can change the this pointer of a method by using bind. You can also change the this pointer of a method using call and apply. So those are three different ways outside of what I consider to be the core rule. So remember the core rule, and just kind of remember those other things, especially bind. You're going to need it. So now that we know this pointer, we can really start diving into object-oriented JavaScript. In order to really understand object-oriented JavaScript, the first thing we have to do is understand what the prototype is. JavaScript has something called prototypical inheritance, which means that It's much different in type of inheritance than what you guys are probably used to with like C++. It uses this one object that's actually assigned to a function, and that object that's assigned to a function is called prototype. And what it is that is the blueprint. That's the best way to describe it. The prototype is the blueprint, so that anytime you use the new keyword basically takes that prototype and copies it and assigns that instance to the value of that copied prototype. So just imagine a function has a prototype. When you put new in front of that function name, what new does is it copies the prototype, so you have a copied object, and it assigns the instance to that copy. That's how prototype works. So just to kind of show you, you have person, and inside person you might have this first, this last. This person actually has a prototype, and it's called prototype. It's an empty object because I haven't assigned anything to it, which means that any of my new persons, they're not going to have prototype variables. Now I know what you're probably thinking, well, what about the first and last? Those are assigned to the this pointer. Well, I haven't said new yet, so it hasn't actually assigned any of the this pointers, and I haven't actually executed this function to assign the this pointers. So it makes a copy of the prototype, assigns the new variable to it, but whenever you call new, you're also instantiating the class using a function call. So if I were to create a new person and then console log that, what you would actually see is that those properties now exist. The reason why those properties exist is because I actually instantiated that method, assigning to this point those properties to the this pointer. Now something that you probably would most likely see is where you can actually pass in these as variables. That's kind of the point of having classes. So I could say so now that also works, where it's basically taking those as arguments and assigning them to the this pointer. Let's talk about the prototype though. This person has a prototype associated with it. So, and before I start that, a lot of people, let's say we wanted to create a method on person. A lot of people are very used to doing something like this, like get name. So then if I did that and I said get name, you would see that it actually prints it out. So a lot of people are used to doing that, and it actually works. So a lot of people are like, oh, okay, it works, so therefore it's good. That's an anti-pattern. What I'm doing there is an anti-pattern. Let me explain why. Every time I create a new person, I am also creating this function, which means that we're not using the prototype here. I'm actually creating that function over and over and over again for every single person I create. And oh, and by the way, if I were ever try to extend this person and create a new class that extends it, I couldn't actually do anything with that. I could duck punch it. I could duck punch the get name method, but I couldn't actually use prototypical inheritance to do stuff with it. So the way that you're actually supposed to solve that problem is you're supposed to use prototype to define methods that every single instance of your class should get. These methods are essentially the public methods, and I assign them to the prototype. And all I do is I basically copy what I have here, that this pointer is relevant. And now I get rid of this guy. So now all the constructor function simply has the properties, prototypes get the methods. So now whenever I call this will still work. Yep, it's the same thing. What's cool about this is now I can start using inheritance. So let's talk a little bit about inheritance. You create inheritance by actually copying the prototype. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an employee object. The employee object is going to get first name, last name, but they're also going to get an ID. Okay? The thing is an employee is a person. Okay, so I used is a, so therefore I'm using inheritance. So at that point, before I do the constructor function, let me tell you how do you extend person. You extend it by actually assigning the prototype to a copy of the person's prototype. So if you think about it, you're actually you want a copy of the person's prototype and assign it to the employee. So to do that, you use object create. The reason why I'm not using new here is because new is problematic, because new will trigger the constructor function. We don't want to trigger the constructor function. We just wanted a copy of the prototype. So to do that, you can use object create, and then it's person prototype. So what I've done here is I've copied the person prototype to the employee. All right. I'm copying the person prototype to the employee prototype. There's one other problem that I have. I just lost where I was. And the problem that I have is the constructor function is also assigned to the prototype. So what that means is if I said new employee here by doing this, it wouldn't call my constructor function that's right here. It would call persons, because the constructor function is assigned to the prototype, and it's assigned to a property called constructor. So I have to reassign it. So that's how you do that. So you're basically copying the prototype and you're reassigning the employee. So now if ever I did new employee here, employee, this will actually create an employee object that extends person. And the only other thing that I have to add here is I also have to add, I have to make sure that, a lot of times people talk about the super whenever you're doing object-oriented, you have to call the super class. You still have to do that in JavaScript, you just have to do it a little bit differently. Here you have to use the call method. So call, you pass into this pointer, and then all the arguments. Well, person doesn't take ID, so what I could actually do is I could actually assign ID here, and so now what I've got is I'm creating a person with a first and last name. So this would actually work. If I type get name, it would actually say that. Let me just do a different name so you know it's actually doing something. So employee has the method get name now. The reason why and you noticed I didn't create the get name method on employee. I created it on person. The reason it worked is because employee got person's prototype, copied it. So I have it. What's also cool about this is I could actually I could extend it. So let me just say, what if I wanted to do type get name? So this is me deciding, okay, for employees, I want to show the employee ID. So what I'm going to do is call the person prototype get name. I have to call it with my this pointer. That's the only thing that's a little bit squirrely when you're doing object-oriented JavaScript. And then what I'm going to do here now is just say return name plus the this ID. So now, if I'm an employee, if I get name is actually going to contain undefined. Why is that undefined? Oh, it's because I didn't pass an ID. So now employees will have the ID associated with them, but a person will not. So both person and employee now at work, I've got object-oriented JavaScript. Classes are extending each other. Everyone's happy. That is how you essentially do object-oriented in JavaScript. Now there's one other thing I want to kind of mention before I kind of get into the jQuery plugins. I'm going to make sure that I have time here. Yeah, we got about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. There's this also thing where you can kind of combine modules and classes together to create this module pattern for object-oriented. You notice every time I'm creating a class here, I'm actually creating the class name on the global on like this global scope, and there's still a lot of problems with this where I can't have private methods, for example, in my classes. So in order to do like classes that have private methods, public methods, you can actually combine that module pattern that we had with classes. So let's just take my person for an example, and let me wrap it inside of a self-executing, let me just do person here. So I can actually wrap this person inside of a self-executing anonymous function and then return the class. What's cool about this is now I can actually do some private methods in this. I have access to it, and then also I'm only exposing the class as essentially the module. So the module pattern doesn't have to apply to the squiggly bracket models. You can actually pass back a function, which would essentially be a class. Pretty cool. So one last thing before we stop, I've already got the code already written for these jQuery plugins. What I've essentially done is, so if I go back on my presentation, if you guys want to just check it out, I have some examples here that I've done in JS Fiddle that shows you how you can essentially integrate object-oriented into real HTML, DOM. Okay, how do we really apply this to a web page? This is just an example. What I've essentially done here, and if you guys go to this, if you guys go to the presentation, you guys can open up this fiddle and see how it works. Is I'm using jQuery. I've got this button right here that is on the DOM, and so essentially what I'm doing is I've got a class called button. I have an init method, and this init method adds the class, which is the button type. The button type defaults to default, and then it assigns the text. What you get is an actual button. So this is like a jQuery button, but I'm doing object-oriented. You could do some really cool stuff here using extending the class. So let's say I wanted to create a danger button. Can't use my. You know what? I'm going to open this here, right here. So what's cool about this is I can also create this danger button, extend the button element, but I assign that class. And then I can create a crazy button, which tells it to touch me if you can, and that in the init function it does like this crazy mouse over thing, so that when you try to click it, it just gets away from you. What it looks like is like there it is. Up. So if you guys want to see like some real life, I know this is not like a practical example, but it certainly is fun. But you can't touch it. You can't touch this. That's a good example of how you can use. Now my mouse scroll works. How you can use object-oriented to create different types of buttons, and then you can actually create a jQuery plugin just using that class. So a lot of people who are writing jQuery plugins, you'll find that you're very, very much handcuffed to jQuery. You can really get away from that by making everything in classes. And then the only jQuery connection is this jQuery FN, which is the prototype of jQuery. And here you're creating a crazy button. And then this is all jQuery boilerplate code. And then you just instantiate a new crazy button every time you create it. So now this actually creates a crazy button that you can add on your web page. You guys can take this if you want. I mean, I'm sure this will have widespread usage on the web. It's fun. So anyway, that's it. I really appreciate you guys listening in. This is the JavaScript module class I was telling you guys about, where you can have a private method, private variables. And that's it. Thank you so much. Any questions? Yeah.
In C++, we have a private, public keyword.
Yep.
So for JavaScript, it looks like you don't have that.
You don't have a public-private keyword, but you can simulate it using a module. So like this would be a private variable. This would be a private method. These are public. This is a public variable. This would be a public method and a public method. So you can simulate it using JavaScript with the module pattern.
That's the only way. That's the only way to show. Differentiate the public and private.
Yeah, you don't have keywords that say that this is public and private. It's just the way you build it will create that simulation of public and private. Any other questions? Yeah.
Okay, you use the classical OP. Do you use the JavaScript prototypal inheritance a lot versus the classic OOP?
Classic OOP being the classic.
No, classic as in the Java or the C++ or the C#.
Yeah. So
it's the prototypal inheritance of JavaScript.
It's almost a misnomer to say it's OOP, the classical OOP, because JavaScript it kind of simulates object
It
oriented.
can simulate it, but if you go with the prototypal inheritance, you don't have to do a lot of that extra coding you're doing, as far as I understand it to be.
Are you
So in other words,
not using JavaScript though, right?
Yeah, using JavaScript with the prototypal inheritance. So you would create you wouldn't even use the new word anymore. This is something that I've read in Doug Crawford's
Okay.
stuff.
That's a dangerous statement.
Yeah, I understand. JSN, JSLint, and all that stuff. It's very opinionated.
So he's saying you don't need the new keyword.
Yeah, and a lot of others are saying, like Eric Elliott doesn't like using the new keyword either because of a lot of the extra overhead that comes with it.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that article. So if you send it to me, typically I keep a far distance from anything written by Douglas Crawford, but I'm very interested in that because I've got an open mind. I'll read about it.
Okay, they talk about using especially Eric talks about using the prototypal inheritance, where you create the objects and you extend it from there, and you don't have to keep creating new objects. You just keep extending the one you've got.
Using object create.
We'll use object create will help, or if you just use the .prototype keyword would also do it.
Okay, I'm curious how that's different than what I was doing, other than not using the keyword, which I'm interested. So send me an article if you can. I've got my.
I'll have to. This is a lot of reading I've been doing lately. So I'm trying to learn JavaScript for the past 6 months.
Okay.
I just came from .NET to JavaScript.
Yeah, that's a common thing happening these days as well. So okay, yeah, I'm very interested in that. So if you just ping me online, I'm pretty easy to find online. So just ping me and I'll be interested to read that.
Yeah, if I can find a couple of the articles that I read prior to this, I'll send them to you.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Which IDE did you use for JavaScript?
Oh, WebStorm. WebStorm's awesome. Yeah, you can have presentation mode where you can do stuff like that. And this is actually, just so you guys know, when I was executing it, I'm actually using Node.js. So this is actually running this JavaScript in Node. This is my browser based, but it's JavaScript, so it works.
Spell it?
Huh?
Just spell it, the ID.
Let me actually, I'll just pull it up.
It's right there in the top left.
Yeah, it's called WebStorm. It is the best IDE. Anything from JetBrains is going to be good. JetBrains has like PHP Storm. If you guys are doing PHP, which I think PHP also has WebStorm capabilities. It's a good one.
But I saw you have a JS Fiddle. JS Fiddle.
Oh, JS Fiddle. Yeah, I use JS Fiddle a lot as well. That's right here. JS Fiddle is really good if you want to just like really quickly try to prototype something that you need on the web, on the browser. JS Fiddle I highly recommend just because it's a really good way to prototype something, like the crazy buttons. If you guys want to use that, feel free. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just a question about backend. Is there a specific database that you use for Node.js?
Yeah, I like Mongo, but I like any NoSQL database. There's a lot of really good ones coming out. Like One from Basho is really good. What was I called? React is a good one I've heard. Postgres is now NoSQL. I mean, it can be both. He's got a little Postgres fanboy over here.
I should have never used it.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, okay. He's an evangelist, even though he's never tried it. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there anything changed in the ES6?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things that are changing in ES6. I didn't want to go over that because you could pretty much spend an entire presentation over that. One thing is with the scope variables, scope is changing with, instead of the bar keyword, there's a let keyword, which allows you to essentially control the scope a little bit better, is what the let keyword does. There's also generators using yield, and I'm not quite as versed on the ES6 stuff. And I also believe there's a lot of object-oriented stuff coming into ES6 as well. So maybe that should be a future meetup is ES6. Although I think you guys recently had one on ES6.
Not yet.
Not yet?
I'm talking to Rob. I mean, all these transpilers and all that. Now it's catching up.
Yeah, I would come to that meetup because I need to learn.
They're also using strict much more on ES6.
The strict mode.
Yeah, I think it's more tight. It's tighter.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I can slap my hand. I haven't actually read up much on it. I need to. Always something to learn in this field. Any other questions? Yeah.
Going back to patterns, when you're creating functions, can you explain the difference between like function name or like var name?
Oh yeah, I'm actually surprised I didn't go over that. Because that's a very common thing that you'll see with functions. A lot of time, let me actually just get into my functions section. But yeah, so a lot of times you'll see people define a function like this. In fact, I don't type it this way, so I'm having a hard time with it. But then you'll also see people type it like this. What's the difference? There's actually no difference, although I would like to say that I prefer this over this simply because you get the notion that you have a variable, that a function is, you're assigning, essentially what's happening here is you're assigning an anonymous function to a variable, and it gives it a name. You can also give this a name, which a lot of people do as well. And the reason why you would do that is for traceability. Whenever you're debugging, you actually get the name of their functions whenever you're tracing.
Okay, the second one has a more flexibility. It can be used anywhere.
Yeah.
Inside the function, you can do this thing to create its local function.
Yeah. So I don't actually prefer this method. The only time I do this is when I'm using a callback function. I will always do it this way. Otherwise, I always do it like this.
Yeah. The other thing is sometimes the evaluation is different, between them. So just be careful about when it is evaluated.
When it's evaluated?
Yeah.
Oh, are you talking about like the scope is going to be the same, but I can possibly
It is slightly different to the
It's slightly different when it
Yeah.
is,
Practically it's not, but it is slightly
I've actually, to be honest with you, I've never really dug into what the big difference is. All I know is I don't do this. I do this.
Yeah.
I rarely actually give my functions also a name as well. But there's a lot of frameworks that say to do this everywhere, to name your functions.
Okay, it helps you to when you are in a debugger, it can help you where you are.
That's what I've heard. Is the debugger you get the traceability of
The only
it.
place that really helps you is in the debugger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and it also, like in a callback function, like I've seen, here's something interesting that I use that for. So have you guys heard of like set interval, right? Set interval is like the evil thing they say to never use. Does anybody know why you should never use set interval? Does anybody know what set interval does? Set interval will actually call something over and over and over again, right? So you go, here every 1 second it's just going to keep getting called. Well, this is all great, but what happens here if inside of the function you're actually executing something that takes longer than 1 second? Set interval is a jerk. It'll just keep calling you every 1 second, even though you're not done with whatever it is you're doing. And so it's actually bad to use set interval. Well, how can you simulate set interval with functions. You can actually do that, and you do it using named functions. So turn this to a set timeout, name this something like that. Then what you can do is do whatever. This can also be like something asynchronous that takes a long time. And then when it's done, just call try again. That does the same thing as set interval. So instead of using set interval, do it like this, because this gives you way more control over when it's called again. And then also you're using that named, instead of that being an anonymous function, this is actually a named function that you can actually call again. So that's an interesting little tidbit to take away. Good question. I'm glad you asked that, because I'm surprised I didn't go into detail over that. Any other questions? All right. Well, hey guys, do not forget to get beta codes for Form.io. I'd love for you guys to try it out and let me know what you guys think. And otherwise, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Until next time.